All right, so let's finish this up. So the final thing we're going to talk about is forgetting. Now I need you to go back to the third page. We were on the first page. Go back to the third page. Halfway down, it says forgetting on it. So again, we were talking about the long-term memory and failures with the long-term memory. One of these is forgetting. The first person who kind of basically just started to measure, become have any interest in forgetting and how it's related to memory was Hermann Ebbinghaus, around late 1800s, early 1900s. He basically, what he did is he created a list of nonsense syllables and then had himself memorize it and see how many he could over a period of time. So if you look at the graph on the left, the elapsed time since learning versus the retention rate. Obviously, when he first learned them immediately, he remembered it 100%, but as it went on, even 20 minutes down to 58, all the way down to 31 days later, he only remembered 21% of the nonsense syllables. And he created what became to be known as the Ebbinghaus curve, or the forgetting curve, which is what you see on the left. For a long time, this was basically, the only thing we had in psychology and science about forgetting and its relation to memory. But as we continue on, people have kind of dismissed this because Ebbinghaus was just trying to remember nonsense syllables, these words or these, stupid syllable words. They had no meaning to him. They were just nonsense. They weren't semantic. And usually when we're trying to remember things, most of the time we're trying to make them semantic and somewhat memorable to ourselves. So usually the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is, it's mostly forgotten and kind of dismissed today. So if we're trying to retrieve and obviously failing to do so, there's two kinds of ways we can forget, either recall or recognition. And I want you to think about this like two different kinds of tests. So recall is how we measuring a memory in which a person has to retrieve information that's been learned earlier, but there's no kind of help. They have to recall without any help or any stimulus or any, little hints. So think about that like an essay or a fill in the blank or a short answer test question. There's no word bank or anything. Now, recognition is a measure of memory in which a person has to identify items that they learned earlier. So they just have to identify here. There's no recall. They just have to recognize. So the difference between recall and recognition. So an example of a recognition would be a multiple choice test question, or even the fill in the blank definition and application quizzes we do. A recall example would be our reading quizzes. If I didn't let you use notes and I was a terrible person, which sometimes I might do. And so let's talk about why we forget. There's two different ways. If you look at the image on the bottom of the slide, there's a girl. She's doing two different things. In the first one, she's studying for French, and then she studies for Spanish right afterwards. And she only, on the Spanish test, only remembers French. She only remembers French. On the bottom, she studies French, then she studies Spanish. And then on the French test, she only remembers Spanish. So the difference between these two, the first one is proactive interference. Pro, again, meaning new. It's when old memories block new memories. When old memories block new memories. So that would be on the bottom. Her old memories of French are blocking her new, or I'm sorry, that would be reversed. It would be the first one. Her old memories of French are blocking her new memories of Spanish. My bad. So that's proactive. Think pro, new, old, blocking new. Versus retroactive, which is when new memories get in the way of older memories. Retro, old. So that would be on the bottom where she studies for French first, and she can only remember French on the Spanish test because she studied for it first before she studied for Spanish. Another example of this would be a locker combination. That would be, the very first couple of weeks of school, if you were trying to get into your locker and you couldn't remember your new proactive, your new locker combo, you could only remember your old one. Old was blocking the new, proactive. Versus if you go back to your old locker and you try and open it and your new memory of your new locker combination is blocking your old one, that would be retro. New is blocking old, retro. Decay theory is exactly what it sounds like. If a person doesn't access or use memory, it will start to decay. Think about if you don't use a certain skill. Like if you don't, after I don't take a dance class for a while, when I go back, I'm pretty rusty. It's a lot of memory stuff I don't remember. You know, think about when we're studying for the AP Psych exam and we have to go all the way back to the bio unit and try and remember everything from that. That's why I give you cumulative tests so the decay theory doesn't happen. Next, we go to repressed memories, which is a pretty controversial issue in the psych world. Repressed memories are something very, very awful, usually very awful. And you push it or you repress it and suppress it back into your unconscious. Freud was a huge proponent of repressed memories. I mean, some people believe it, some people don't. Usually it's when it's something very serious, like a sexual assault, rape, you know, experiencing death in front of you, something extremely traumatic. You suppress it into your unconscious and it's at that point forgotten. Now, Freud says you can get repressed memories back through hypnosis, through meditation, and a couple other things we'll talk about later in the year, how Freud believes you can pull back repressed memories. But the problem with repressed memories is misinformation. If a psychologist or a specialist is trying to get you to remember, you know, something traumatic, they can be feeding you misinformation, and not on purpose, but they can be like, hey, remember how it was dark outside, and remember how the person who attacked you was a black man, even though that might not necessarily be true. So misinformation. So some repressed memories, when they're brought out, are true, but sometimes they're false. Next, we want to talk about amnesia. We've got Dory in the top corner. There's two different kinds of amnesia. We've got retrograde and anterograde. Now, retro again, old. Think of retro, old. So retrograde amnesia is memory loss of a segment from the past. So a chunk of your memory is gone, or a chunk of your past is gone. That's what you always see in the movies, the romantic movies, where someone doesn't remember who they are and they didn't remember they were married and blah, blah, blah. Versus anterograde amnesia, which is the inability to lay down new memories. So if any of you have seen 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler, she can't remember anything. She can't make any new memories. She has the big car accident and she can't make memories after that. So retro and anterograde. Last thing we're going to talk about is dementia. Dementia is an extremely broad category. That says road category and should say broad. I forgot a B. It's a broad category of memory loss. It can be either declarative, or procedural, so, you know, declarative facts, information, or procedural, you know, how to go to the bathroom, how to tie your shoe. A lot of people who suffer from dementia honestly forget these very simple procedural tasks. And finally, Alzheimer's, which is a facet of dementia. It's, you know, it's a subtype of it. It usually relates to episodic memories. Usually people forget specific episodes. They forget, you know, getting sick. They forget losing somebody. They forget having a child. That's very severe forms of Alzheimer's. And that is the end, guys. Thanks for sticking through 3 of those. Hopefully you are not Michael Scott and you do understand some things. I will see you again in class.